All right. So as I said, Austin made this observation that there were words, that there were expressions that made what you are talking about happen. Okay? So if you say, I promise something, you thereby made a promise. Okay? So originally, he thought that he would be able to develop a whole theory of language behavior, or language acts, speech acts, right? Based on this idea of performativity, but he soon came to realize that you can't do that, okay? Because in fact, performatives are, well, not really the exception, but they're not that common. I mean, there's plenty of them, right? But the majority of actions aren't performative, okay? So instead, Austin started sort of looking more closely at sort of general speech acts. And he came to the conclusion that actually, when you're doing a speech act, okay, as I am doing right now, for example, I am talking to you, that's one big speech act, you are in fact doing three things at the same time, okay, which he confusingly called speech acts as well. Okay, so basically he's saying every speech act contains three speech acts. Okay, and then he calls them locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary. All right, so much to the despair of students everywhere, because you have to learn to distinguish the three levels of what is going on. Okay, now the locutionary act is the straightforward one that everybody understands without any trouble. Basically, it consists of the actual uttering of the words. Okay, so right now I am producing these words that I am saying, you know, with a certain accent, with a certain speech, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that is the locutionary act. Okay, it's my producing these words. If I were writing to you a written note, that would be the locutionary act. If I'm sending you an email, that would be those words, those characters would be the locutionary act. Okay? So it's basically, you know, the production of the signifier, if you remember lecture 1. Now, the illocutionary act is where things get a little bit more complicated, okay? So basically, it's the purpose of the utterance, is what the speaker is trying to accomplish, okay? So if I say, what time is it? Right? What am I trying to accomplish? To get you to tell me the time, right? So it's a request, right? So that would be the illocutionary act, okay? If I say, pick up that envelope, what am I trying to accomplish? Well, that somebody will pick up the envelope. So that's an order, okay? So that would be the kind of illocutionary act that I'm doing, right? So what's the purpose of saying pick up that envelope? Is to make so that the world is changed as a result of my saying so. If I say, what time is it? What's the purpose of my utterance? To make sure that I am told what time it is. Okay? So that's the illocutionary act. It's what you're trying to accomplish with your utterance. The perlocutionary act is the one that confuses everybody, including professional philosophers. So feel free to feel sort of comforted by this. I almost got the stress wrong. I corrected myself in the nick of time. Mm-hmm. So the perlocutionary act is the effect that the utterance has on the world. And this is where it becomes confusing, because it can be either intended or unintended. Okay? So if I say, get up, okay? And Dr. Pickering stands up, well, that was my perlocutionary act. That is, I had the intended effect to get her to stand up, and it worked. She stood up, okay, or it didn't work in this particular case because she didn't get up, okay? So that would be my effect. Now, on the other hand, imagine that I want to scare you, okay? So I wait in a corner, and when you walk by, I go, boom, right? And you go, I have a heart attack and keel over, right? Let's hope not, right? Well, that would be a perlocutionary act, okay? It would be a consequence of my having said boo and having scared you, okay? I certainly didn't intend it, but it would be a consequence of my doing that, okay? So that also would be a perlocutionary act, okay? So that's why, as I said, it really becomes confusing because you may either fail or succeed in your intended perlocutionary act, and all of those are perlocutionary acts. Okay, so it's really confusing. Yes.
Is the illocutionary and the perlocutionary act, can they do the same thing?
Okay, that's a good question. What would be an example?
If you intended to scare me and I became scared.
Well, those would be the same thing at the perlocutionary level. Okay, so it would be a successful. It was the intention of the perlocutionary act, and it happened to be successful.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So what would it be classified as?
As perlocutionary. Okay, because the locutionary act would be me saying there's a quiz tomorrow. Okay, and that is a statement. So at the locutionary level, what I just said is a statement. So my elocution is a statement. My perlocutionary goal was to scare you. Because in fact, I lied, there is no test tomorrow, I just was trying to scare you. And I succeeded, because you in fact were scared by my utterance. Okay? So, okay, but I'm fascinated by let's say that I wanted. Let's say that my goal is for you to all right, I'm going to have to think about that because I think I can produce a perverted example in which I'm going to have the two be the same. But
Well, wouldn't the boo one?
Yeah, like what if you...
Well, no, because boo is an expressive. Okay, so I am expressing boo, and then the perlocutionary effect is that I want to scare you, and then I can do something. No, it would have to be something that my elocutionary act is, for example, to ask a question, and my perlocutionary act is I want you to ask that question.
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to think about it. It's a clever question, and as I said, I think I may either come up with a reason why you cannot be, or a really interesting example, and I'm gonna have to email some philosophers and and make their lives miserable.
Come back to that next week.
All right.
Thank you to you.
All right, that's good. See, I love this kind of thing.
What happens if you pose a question as an illocutionary act that requires a response, but you get an unintended response?
Well, that's an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
So, for example, I say, are you cooking dinner? And the answer is no, you're taking me out to dinner. Right? I mean, I was hoping to get a nice home-cooked dinner. Instead, I'm going to have to spend a lot of money. Right? So that's an unintended consequence of my performing the locutionary act of asking a question.
So that's the perlocutionary act, yeah. Or force.
Well, either way.
Yeah.
Act or force. It's a elocution. People say elocutionary force, perlocutionary force.
Well,
the only one I've never heard is locutionary force.
Stuff and T-cell stuff. Sometimes it's often called force instead of act. So perlocutionary force. What's the thing that happens, kind of thing. So, but they're the same.
Well, like for example, scaring somebody or intimidating somebody or making somebody happy. that's the perlocutionary force, right? If I say, I'm giving everybody an A in this class, right? Okay, so perlocutionary force would be everybody going, hey, celebrating, you know, and like, okay. So that would be my intended perlocutionary force or act.
But wouldn't that still be, so the example you just used, are you making dinner tonight? Right, you're implying that you want her to make dinner.
Ah.
And then she does make dinner.
Okay.
Both of those are the same.
You haven't been to our house.
All right, but setting aside that, you said something very interesting that I'm going to answer in the last 2 slides, okay? Because you've introduced the idea of indirect speech act, okay?
Right.
So we're gonna hold that thought and get back to it because it's a very important one.
And that's not illocutionary act.
Well,
Are those mutually?
it's more complicated than that. Okay, so let's just hold that thought and we'll get back to that. Okay, but again, let's recap. Locutionary act is producing the actual speech act. The illocutionary act is the purpose for which you're doing the speech act. Okay, not the goal, but you know, it's asking a question, making a statement. It's sort of a general purpose. And then you have the perlocutionary act that can be intended or unintended. The intended act will be your goal, as in what am I trying to do, okay? And then the unintended may be just consequences that you didn't necessarily anticipate. Okay, so then John Searle, who was educated in England as well, and he worked with Austin originally. Then he moved to the United States, to California, and he wrote a book called Speech Acts in 1969 that basically took Austin's ideas and formalized them. He sort of worked sort of his way very systematically, very thoroughly through it, okay? And so first of all, he strengthened the foundation of the theory by saying, you know, basically language is rules, is made of rules, you follow rules. These rules are constitutive, and a constitutive rule is basically an activity that if the rule is not followed, doesn't exist anymore, okay? So if you play chess, you know, you have to move the pieces a certain way or you're no longer playing chess. But if you're running, you know, suppose that I go outside and I start running wearing my suit and all, right? You'd be like, okay, that's a very strange way of running, but still you can tell I'm running, okay? Now, the fact that I'm not wearing sneakers and little shorts and, you know, the accoutrements of a runner doesn't mean that I'm not running. I'm still running. The fact that there is no finish line and nobody with a chronometer doesn't mean I'm not running. I'm still running. Okay, but if I say, hey, Jade, let's play chess, and you're like, well, there's no pieces, there is no board, and, you know, but still, we're playing chess. No, it doesn't work that way, right? You have to have the pieces and the board, and you have to follow the rules, okay? If I say, let's play chess, but I can move the pawns in every direction that I want, we're no longer playing chess, we're playing something else, okay? So in that sense, the rules of chess are constitutive, whereas the rules of running, it doesn't matter. Okay, and so Searle says institutional facts are based on constitutive rules, and that's what Austin called a social fact. Okay, so Searle then begins by categorizing all the possible illocutions, mind you, all of them, into 5 classes. Okay, and he even has these little symbols for them. You don't need to remember the symbols. But so Searle says there are 5 types of illocutions. That's it. Or you only need 5. Now notice that that's an incredibly bold statement, right? Because I would have said, well, maybe 100. Okay. So it says there's assertions when you state something, like the sky is blue. That's an assertion. Okay. Requests, you know, please pick up the envelope, right? That's a request. Promises, you know, if you pick up the envelope, I'll buy you ice cream. She only goes like, yeah, all right, got ice cream out of this deal. Warnings, where you say if you don't pick up the envelope, something bad will happen. I don't buy you ice cream. There you go. And then there's yes or no questions. Okay? And yes or no questions are basically things that you can only answer by yes or no. So if I say, are you cooking dinner? Yes or no? Right? You have to say no. All right, okay, so she's not cooking dinner, right? So that's you cannot say, well, you can say it depends, but then you're refusing to play the language game.
Right.
Right? That is, you're saying, oh, I'm not playing that game, I'm playing another game. Right? And that is a completely different story, and we're not going to go there. All right, so 5 classes of elocution. And then he says, well, then so we can then categorize all of speech acts into these 5 classes, okay? So there's assertives, which are basically statements, okay? Directives, that are basically commands, requests, directions, you know, that kind of thing. Expressives, where basically you're expressing an emotion, and that's what you're doing. Commissives, which is when you commit yourself to something. Okay, so these are things when you promise something or you refuse something. Okay, so if Dr. Pickering says, I'm cooking dinner, and I'm like, no, you're not. Okay, then I'm refusing her offer to cook dinner. Okay, to cook dinner. Okay, and then what he calls declaratives, and that's what Austin called performatives. Okay, so here there's another example. Class dismissed. The class is not over until the teacher says class dismissed. Now, there's other ways of ending class, like, for example, walking out and leaving, okay? But the students don't know whether I left the classroom and will come back in 2 minutes, or if the class is over. When you say class dismissed, class is dismissed. By the very fact...
With Henry Widdowson, remember?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. We had there's a very famous linguist called Henry Widdowson, and he was giving a talk for us at Georgia State, and halfway through his talk, he just walked off. And no one knew why he'd walked off. The chair of the department was standing there, we were all looking, all the graduate students are looking, he's a really famous guy. And then about a minute later, he comes back. He'd just gone to the bathroom, and but he never said,
I'll be back or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
he was just like, and he disappeared. They were all sitting there like, yeah. So that's definitely a social fact. You're not supposed to walk out the door.
That's why performatives are so important.
Yeah.
If you say,
Was he trying to make a point?
no, you just have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, you just had to go to the bathroom. But I don't know whether, because it wasn't a lecture about pragmatics. But I don't know whether it sort of, gives him a laugh to do that in front of people. I don't know. But he's so famous. He's one of the most famous linguists in applied linguistics. Then maybe he's just like, I can do this kind of thing, so I'm gonna do it. I don't know. We never did find out, but it was very funny, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So then as I said, Searle says these are the 5 big groups of speech acts, the 5 kinds of speech acts that you can have. Okay. Now, mind you, each of these can have its own elocution, okay? And again, there are ways of using language, right? Searle says. Notice how that is. It's very easy to see Wittgenstein in the background. Then Searle introduces this idea of realization pattern that was then taken up by many people beyond him. As well. So the idea then is that every speech act, every one of the 5, has a set of realization patterns, okay? And what a realization pattern is a collection of ways that you can do that speech act, okay? So take, for example, promising, okay? I can say, if you pick up the envelope, I'll buy you ice cream, okay? That's a fairly straightforward way. You know, if I say, if you do this, I will do that. But I could have said, I promise you ice cream if you pick up the envelope, right? So in this case, I'm explicitly saying, I promise, okay? Or I could have said, and now we're going to the indirect thing, you know, good students who pick up envelopes get ice cream, okay? I'm not promising anything technically, right? But in fact, I am promising, right? And we're gonna get to this in a second. Or I could have, okay, can you think of other ways that you could promise something? If you pick up that envelope, there's ice cream in it for you, right? That's another way of saying exactly the same thing.
I wonder what great thing would happen if you picked up the envelope.
Right. That involve ice cream
That involves
making.
ice cream,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, the point is, we could keep going like this for hours. It would be very boring, but we could, because there is literally an infinite way
Right.
of performing that speech act, okay? And that set of ways of performing it is the realization pattern of promising, okay? Now, and this is where things get interesting from the standpoint of second language acquisition, is that it turns out that different languages don't necessarily follow the same rules to realize the speech act, okay? So every language of the world will have, you know, directives, okay? Because every language of the world will have to be able to say, please do this, or, you know, it'd be a good idea if you did this, right? Because that's things that people need to do with other people all the time, okay? However, the realization patterns may be different, okay? So every language, I'm guessing, has yes/no questions. Is that a universal?
I think so.
Presumably.
Yeah.
If you know of any language that does not have yes/no questions, email
Well, okay, so
salvatore.attardo@tamuc.edu.
yeah, the universal is that open-ended versus closed questions. So open-ended, closed questions would have to be yes
Yes,
or
no
no.
question.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right, right.
So it probably exists. But if you have an example, salvatore.attardo@. So because then all languages need to know how to need to have a way of asking a yes/no question. However, there is no guarantee that all languages do it the same way. Okay? So for example, in English, you can ask a yes/no question by a rising tone, correct? No, falling
Oh, a
tone.
rising or a falling tone.
By a rising or a falling tone,
Yeah.
just to make things easy.
Yeah,
In Chinese, I'm willing to bet you can't do that. Okay?
yeah, in Chinese, it's usually a register difference. So instead of a rise or a fall, it's your voice goes up a notch.
All right.
And
So as you can see, I just correctly predicted that Chinese was going to behave differently than English just based on the fact that I knew about Chinese tone, right? Let's use a different example that's perhaps more accessible. This goes back to when I was married to my first wife, who was an American. And I discovered the hard way that Americans do not like direct orders. Okay? That is, that if you say, give me the water, okay, an American doesn't like that. You have to say, could you please possibly, if it's not too much trouble, from the kindness of your heart, give me the water. Okay? And then they're like, yeah, sure, here's the water. Sometimes. I mean, I'm being facetious, but quite seriously, there is research that's been done on this, is that people perceive direct orders differently depending on their culture. So Americans perceive them as being essentially rude, whereas Europeans, at least Italians and Poles, I don't know about other languages, but I've seen the research for Italy and Poland, considers bold infinitives, as they're called, absolute imperatives. What am I saying? Bold imperatives to be absolutely normal among intimates, obviously, right? I mean, obviously not with a stranger. That's peculiar. But if you know the other person really well, in Italy you can say, "Give me the water," and they'll just give you the water. Okay?
British English is the same as American English. We don't like it.
Okay.
I don't like it.
That explains many things. So the interesting is this. Now, however, from the perspective of the Poles and the Italians, being super polite is annoying. Okay, that is, when somebody says to me, "Could you please give me the water?" I'm like, "What? Are we on just say what you want," right? Because to me, that politeness is perceived as too much politeness. Whereas if I don't use the politeness, my American ex-wife felt that I was being rude. Okay, so that is an example of a different realization pattern for requests between Italian and Polish on the one hand, and American and British apparently on the other hand. Okay, so that you have to use politeness in one set of languages, and you don't have to use politeness in the other set of languages, and so it's a different way of realizing the same speech act. Because in the end, it's very clear you want the water, right? I mean, there's no question that you want the water in any language.
And I would add to that the importance of the convention is not just that, but that if you don't do it the way people expect, they assume you're giving them another message. So, for example, you would think that if you were Italian and someone said, "Oh, please, maybe if you could, can you give me the water?" They would just say, "Oh, that's like really sweetly, over the top, right?" Rather than just give me the water. In fact, what they think is, what's the problem? Why are they not saying this the way I thought they would? What's the extra message? And the extra message is probably bad, right? Because otherwise, why didn't you just do it the normal way? So it's not like it has no consequences just because something's more polite or less polite, or if it doesn't match the convention, it will have likely unintended consequences.
And there's all sorts of things like that. So, for example, in the expressives, right? Apologizing. When do you apologize? In some languages, you have to apologize for certain behaviors, but you don't have to apologize for these behaviors in other languages.
You're taking my lecture. Stop.
Well,
I know.
that's just an example. It's an example, right? So, anyway, I'm not going any further.
Doctor?
Yes.
If you don't mind possibly sharing where you're from?
I grew up in Italy, but I'm originally from Belgium. I was born in Belgium.
It's just so we know how nice to be.
Yes. Actually, I don't know anything about politeness in French, so I have to check. I would have to document myself to.
Based on the Parisians, it's pretty low on their agenda.
Cultural stereotyping there, Dr. Pickering. All right. So one last thing. Here I put out the felicity conditions for a specific speech act of promising, so that you can see that it actually gets to be fairly complicated, okay? I just wanted to show you, so if we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details, there's a little bit more to it than you think, okay? So the first thing that this is Searle, that he lists is, first of all, you have to have normal input-output conditions. So, for example, you must be able to hear me. I must not have become mute because of a problem with my vocal folds or something like that, right? The noise must not be so deafening that you cannot hear me. I will tell you a funny anecdote, or at least I thought it was funny. I once was in a restaurant and they were playing very loud background music. So the waiter came and said, "Does the music bother you?" And I said, I can't hear you because of the loud music. I thought it was hilarious. The waiter did not, nor did Dr. Pickering at the time. But that would be an example in which I was saying the normal felicity conditions did not apply, right? The music was too loud, so I couldn't hear, right? So normal input-output conditions must apply. You must be speaking the same language, or at least mutually comprehensible varieties of the same language, etc. Then the speaker must express a certain proposition. Okay, now remember, this is logic, right? I mean, so Searle is still using logic as a background, even though logicians would have a fit about this. So the proposition can be anything, okay? Almost anything, because the proposition must be a future act performed by the speaker, okay? If I say, if you pick up the envelope, Dr. Pickering will cook you dinner, it doesn't work. It's not a proper promise, because I cannot guarantee that she will do, in order to promise, you have to promise something that you do, okay? So it has to be a future act performed by the speaker. Now, it has to be a future act, right? If I say, if you pick up that envelope, I will get up this morning. You say, well, that already happened, right? So it doesn't work that way, right? Now, interestingly enough, the thing that you promise must be viewed positively by the hearer. Okay? And the speaker must also agree on this. If you hated ice cream, or you were like allergic and by eating ice cream horrible things happen to you, then if I say I'll buy you ice cream, it's no longer a promise, it's in fact a threat. Okay? Because a threat is basically a promise in which the thing is evaluated negatively by the speaker, by the hearer. Okay? Now, the speaker must not have intended to do the action anyway. Okay? So if I say, if you pick up that envelope, I will eat dinner tonight, it's not a real promise. Why? Well, because I was planning to eat dinner anyway. Right? So it's not a good thing. Another felicity condition that is not listed there is the event is not going to happen anyway, regardless of my actions. So if I say, if you pick up that envelope, the sun will rise tomorrow morning, it's not a good promise, because I have no control over the sun, and the sun is going to come out anyway. Okay, so it's not a good promise. Now, and this is where it gets more interesting, the speaker has to intend to perform whatever they're promising. If I don't mean it, okay, then it's not a good promise. It's a fake promise. It's a lie. Okay? And then you have to, in order for a promise to be a real promise, you have to incur the obligation. In other words, if you say then, I'm so sorry, I cannot take you to have ice cream because something has come up, you must then feel bad and say, I will try to make it up to you, or something along those lines. Okay? So in other words, you have to have an obligation, a moral obligation, to fulfilling the promise. Okay? If there is no moral obligation, then it wasn't a real promise. Okay? So these are some, not all, of the felicity conditions for promises. Okay? So as you can see, it's actually quite complicated. Okay? And there are others that are even more complicated than this. All right. So now, finally, we get to indirect speech acts. And here, basically, the idea is that you can literally say one thing, but in fact mean something else. Okay? And so, in other words, you can do a speech act by saying one thing, but in fact meaning something different. Okay? So your locutionary act is going to be attached to one kind of speech act, but your elocution will be different. Or maybe your perlocution will be different. Okay? So let's look at some example. This is probably one of the oldest examples in the field of pragmatics. The question, can you pass the salt? Literally, what it means is, are you capable of passing the salt? Okay? So if you had broken both of your arms, and you know they were both like in a cast, and I said, can you pass the salt? They said, sorry, no can do. Both of my arms are broken. Okay? So in that case, it would be taken literally. However, because in normal conditions, of course, you can pass the salt, right? It's very lightweight. It's usually within reach on the table, that kind of thing. Because it's so easy to do, normally the answer is, of course you can. Well, therefore, please do. Okay, so then it becomes a request that is, please pass the salt. Okay, so literally, at the locutionary level, it is a request for information. But at the elocutionary level, because it's an indirect speech act, it becomes a request to perform the action, so it's a directive. Okay? So that's an example of how an indirect speech act changes between the locutionary and the elocutionary. Okay? Now, it can also be at the perlocutionary level that the switch happens, right? So, and this would be the example that we had before, which was, what was the example?
Diego, do you remember it? It was something about cooking dinner. But
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Oh, it was like, yeah, as I said, no. The indirect act was where I said, would you cook dinner, you know, or no, was that, what are we having for dinner, right? Where I'm trying to get Dr. Pickering to cook dinner, right? And then, so then there, I'm saying, you know, what will you cook for dinner? That's you know, a question, which at the, so the locutionary force is that,
Right.
You know,
Right.
the act is the question. At the elocutionary level, it is a request for information. What will you cook? But my perlocutionary goal is you will cook, right? I mean, I'm trying to get you to cook, right? So in fact, it's an indirect speech act for cook. So it's an indirect directive, okay? Masked under, masquerading as a request for information, okay? So it can happen at every level. But the point is, you know, basically you have a speech act that looks like it's doing one thing, but in fact it's doing something else.
So this is something that's really interesting when you get to legal language, right? Because a lot of lawyers spend their time, you know, asking questions that set up certain answers, right? So they sound like one thing, but in fact, if you answer them, you're being forced into answering in one way or another. You can't just pick, you know, the way you want to answer. So there's quite a lot of discussion about these kind of things in legal language.
Well, and without you know, being as scary as a lawyer questioning you, where were you on the night of the 5th? You know, something.
No,
like that.
they don't say that. What they say is, you were, your neighbor didn't see you on the night of the 5th, or your wife didn't see you on the night of the 5th, correct? You know, which actually, if you say yes, then implies that, you know, you weren't at home on the night, you know. So, in fact, whether she saw you or not isn't the real issue, right? What the question should be, were you at home? But they ask it in such a way that then you have to say, no, my wife didn't see me, which then, you know, they can keep doing that to a point where they can say, see, that shows that you probably weren't at home, right? So it's clever. Yeah.
But even without being nefarious, as these examples are, you can just be indirect. Okay. Some of you may have seen this. There is a one of these IBM Watson ads where it's set in an office, and this young woman is working with Watson, and I'll put up a link for the ad. The young woman is working with Watson, and a coworker that's obviously obnoxious comes over and says, "So, are you coming to the picnic, the company picnic?" And she says, "No, I can't. We have, to go through these reports." And Watson says, "Oh, I can do these reports in 5 minutes because I'm a supercomputer." She goes, "Oh, well, yeah, but then we have to do, we have all these claims that we must reconcile." "Oh, I've already reconciled them all thanks to my superior interface." And the colleague, the obnoxious colleague goes, "Okay, then I'll see you at the picnic, yay," goes away, and the young woman turns to Watson and says, "You gotta learn to take a hint." Okay? So when the standard form of that is, "Would you go out with me? I have to wash my hair." Okay? So when somebody says that to you, what do you take? Sorry?
It means no.
It means no, right?
Yeah.
But what's the difference between "Would you go out with me?" No, and "Will you go out with me? I gotta wash my hair"?
You want to be polite, you don't want to.
Right. You want to be nice. You don't want to reject the person openly, but you're still rejecting the person, right? So that's an indirect rejection. Now, it has become so stereotypical that now, it becomes like, say, well,
A direct.
yeah, it's so obvious that it no longer works as an excuse. But originally that's how it was done. Okay, so anytime that you say something but you mean something else, you're performing an indirect speech act. Okay. Now, so Searle says you need 4 things to explain how speech acts work. One, indirect speech acts work. Okay. One is, well, the theory of speech acts, which we are in the process of learning. The second one is the cooperative principle, which we will talk about in the next lecture. And then background information, and that would be context. Okay. And the capacity to make inferences. Okay. In other words, to derive logical information from one thing that you already know. Okay. So basically, we have all the information. So there is all sorts of indirect speech acts, and Searle has a list of them. So, for example, the "Can you pass the salt?" It's a whole class where you perform a speech act by asking a preparatory condition for the speech act. Okay? So if I say, "Are you done washing your hair?" what am I really asking?
Can you do something else now?
Can you do something else now? Right? If I say, "Are you done washing your hair?" and I'm waiting for you to be done washing your hair to go out for dinner, then that's what I mean is, can we go to dinner? Okay?
So this is one that I really, and I don't know whether it's because I'm British, but I hate this when people say, "Are you doing anything on Saturday?" And I'm like, well, I don't know whether I want to tell you yes or no, right? Because it depends what you're now about to ask me to do. So if you're about to ask me to look after your little kid and I don't want to, then, but if you're about to ask me, to go to the movies and I do want to, so to me, it's that preparatory condition. And when we start looking at SLA and T-cell, they often say, preparatory conditions are good. And I'm like, well, not necessarily good. So they'll teach students to say this in English. "Oh, what are you doing on Saturday?" And I'm like, no, don't say that. Yeah.
So another class of indirect speech acts is performing a directive, in other words, giving an order, by asking a question about it. So, I used to say to my daughter, did you clean your room? Will you clean your room? When are you going to clean your room? She never cleaned the room anyway, but I was trying to get her to clean the room. Okay? So if I say, when will you turn in the homework? What I'm really saying is turn in the homework. Okay? Because, obviously, the answer is by the 16th, right?
Yes, good.
By the 16th is the answer, right? But by my asking it, what I'm saying is turn in the homework. Okay? So by asking a question about the proposition, about whatever it is that we're talking about, I am performing the indirect speech act of saying, do what the proposition says. Okay? And this introduces the idea of conventionalization, which we're going to talk about, particularly when we talk about politeness. Okay? So again, languages will differ in the way they conventionalize things. Okay? So my standard example of this is greetings. Okay? So in the old-fashioned traditional British greeting, when you met somebody, you're supposed to say, how do you do? And the answer is, how do you do? Okay? To me, that was baffling. Okay? Because it just didn't work, right? So even though I had practiced doing that, the first time that I met somebody, I said, well, thank you. And I was like, no. So I failed to perform the greeting, sequence. Okay, so again, it can be that different languages have codified differently the way to do an indirect speech act. And if you're trying to do an indirect speech act in the wrong way, it's going to confuse the other person completely. Okay, just because they won't understand it. And as Dr. Pickering said, they don't say, oh, well, clearly you're trying to perform the indirect speech act in a non-conventional way. They say, you're evil. Mm-hmm. Okay? And they react to you as if you are being deliberately difficult. Okay? And what's important is the last sentence is important too, is that once a format has become idiomatic, you have to use that idiomatic form. Okay? And if you don't do it, people will notice that it's not idiomatic, and they will assume that there is a meaning attached to it. Okay? So if I greet you in the morning and I say, how are you? What's the standard response?
I'm well.
I'm well, I'm fine. Okay? If you say, I'm okay. Okay, now let's say that you greet me.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm okay. What would you say?
What's wrong?
What's wrong? You see? Because I did not respond idiomatically. Okay, idiomatically the response is, I'm good, thank you, how about yourself? Bye, keep walking. Okay, the moment you say, I'm okay, that means you're not okay. Okay, because it's not the idiomatic response to how are you? Okay? So, it's fascinating as a matter of fact. And different languages, there's no guarantee that languages will do this the same way. Okay? All right. So this is it for today's lecture. So again, recapping this idea of performing actions through language, speech acts, language games, performativity. Okay, the idea that by saying something, you make it happen. The idea that a speech act has three different levels, three different speech acts within it: locutionary, illocutionary, perlocutionary. The idea of felicity conditions, realization patterns of each class of speech acts, and then the idea that you can perform speech acts indirectly. And this idea is a little bit open because you will fully understand the idea of the indirect speech act only after we've looked at Grice's principle of cooperation, which is the next lecture. All right? So this is it for tonight. Any questions?
Anything interesting? What did you find most interesting? Naomi.
I don't know if you will see this later, but about the question like, where are you going to cook tonight?
Mm-hmm.
You thought it's because he wants to cook, but because we have some kind of context. But if you hear by phone, or for me, no, I mean, that person is asking about where are you going to cook? Maybe you're going to cook lasagna or, I don't know, right? But it's because we have some kind of context.
Yes.
And I think you are trying to.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right.
Yes.
So what you're saying is the way that you work out whether it's direct or indirect is based on the context, the people, the person, the timing, the everything. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, if you put out
Point
there,
number 3, mutually shared background
shared.
information. That's the context.
Exactly right.
If we don't have this, I mean, I can.
Right.
think.
Right.
Right,
I mean,
and this happens to learners a lot.
if your
Learners don't understand that it's indirect.
if your phone rang and somebody that you've never spoken to says, "What are you cooking tonight?" You wouldn't say, "Oh, he wants me to cook the dinner," or you would say, "Oh my God," and hang up, right? Because there is no context there, right? So it's only anything is only meaningful within context.
Pragmatics is all about context. Yeah. I mean, if you, without context, pragmatics
I
can't.
thought it was all about the base. All right, fine.
Don't laugh at him, Amanda Kate. Just
Thank you.
encourages him.
I appreciate it. Thank you. You got an A for the class. No.
Anything else interesting or?
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so wait.
What? Class dismissed. No.
That was direct.
Run.
No, so what happens now is that tomorrow you'll give them tonight, correct?
Yes, I'll email them.
So by noon tomorrow, up in everybody's doc share, the doc share for online and for face-to-face, will go up comprehension review questions for 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
So 1 is the first lecture that you saw on video, and the 2 is for this lecture. Yeah, that the online people will also see the video. And
10 questions.
so there's going to be 10 questions, correct?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, we did 40%, so 5.
Yeah.
points
It's 5
each.
questions.
So,
Yeah, it's 5
yeah,
questions.
so there'll be 10 questions. Okay, that's exactly right. But there's also you're not supposed to. They're not supposed to be like little papers or anything.
No, they're short essays
It gives you-
under 100 words.
Under 100
The
words.
instructions are provided with the question.
Yeah. So it's not so much a time suck in terms of what you've got to write as really understanding and going back, if you're not sure, going back over the lecture and the PowerPoint to check. Yeah.
So everything is provided in the lecture.
Everything is
Yeah,
provided.
and that is
Dr. Tano
the
writes
source
on the-
of
yeah, right.
of a certain amount of unhappiness in the past. It's happened that students will go out and Google stuff and find things, etc., and then they confuse themselves. Okay? All the information that you need to answer the comprehension reviews, the final test, all of that is in the lectures, the PowerPoints, and potentially, if you ask a question, then in the answer to that question. Okay? You never have to go beyond that. Okay? All the information that you need is provided to you in the lectures and in the PowerPoint. Okay? Now, we've already started uploading some extra readings and the videos. Those are optional. Okay? You never have to look at the extra readings to answer the comprehension reviews. But because people were going out and finding demented stuff that even I couldn't understand because God knows what's out there,
Yeah.
right? So I said, okay, if they want to read extra, here, I'm going to provide them with some extra reading. I'm not telling you to do the extra reading, but if you want to, you be my guest, but at least read stuff that's
Yeah.
borderline decent, okay? Don't just go out and find some article by some crazy guy that doesn't even know what they're talking about, and then, God help us quote it. Okay? So, don't just go out on Wikipedia and find something and say, but Dr. Attardo, Wikipedia says differently. I don't care that Wikipedia says something else, okay? Because they're wrong. Actually, most of the time,
Wrong,
Wikipedia isn't bad at all, but sometimes it is horribly wrong. And so you have to be super careful. I mean, most of the time, the problem is that the readings are too complicated. They're not wrong. It's just that they're way above the head of an introductory treatment of the subject. Okay, so so you never need to get more information to answer the questions for the comprehension reviews. The comprehension reviews are just there to check whether you understood the materials in the lecture. Okay, and then let me echo again what Dr. Pickering said at the beginning. Don't think for a second that just by looking at the PowerPoint, you don't have to listen to the lecture. That is crazy. Okay? The PowerPoint is just for me to have the example so that I can point at something and I don't have to make up everything off the top of my head. That's the only purpose. Okay? And then I have a picture from time to time that I can point at. Okay? That's the purpose of the PowerPoint. They're not a summary of the lecture. They're not the main points of the lecture. They're just a visual support. Okay? The lecture is the materials. Okay? And there is no textbook. Feel free to thank us later because you don't have to go and buy a set of really expensive books. Okay? So, but then the lectures are the textbook. Okay? Anything else that I should do?
No, I think we are in fact done. If everybody's okay, thank you very much.
Okay, notice the realization pattern, right? Class dismissed. We are done. Thank you very much, right? Same speech act, performative. Class is over. You may now go. Completed different realization. Never stop.
Stop. You stop. We're done.